Hello and welcome to Louise Singleton Creations. I was recently sent some 4-hour demold resin from JDiction and I used it in another project and I loved it, but I didn't time it to see if it was an actual 4-hour demold. So, because I do love the resin and I do want to recommend it to you, my viewers, I thought it's only fair to do a test to make sure that what I'm recommending does what it says on the box, because I had a few questions in my head. For instance, does it matter how deep you pour it? Because in my experience, resin cures faster the deeper you pour it. My other question was, is it 4 hours after the 30 minutes working time or 4 hours after you've mixed it? So yeah, there were a few things I wanted to test. So in today's video, that's what I'll be doing. I'll be conducting a little test, but I will also make a fun little project at the end with my test pieces because I don't like to waste anything. So if you're curious too, stay tuned and let's see what happens. To make it a fair test, I wanted to make sure that the moulds that I used were all the same size but at different heights, and so I made my own moulds just using some acrylic sheets. I think it's 1mm acrylic sheet that I used. And all I did was I cut strips of 2 centimetres width so that all my cuboids which I made were 2 centimetres by 2 centimetres, and then the height was going to vary from the smallest one would be 2 centimetres high, then a 4 centimetre, a 6, an 8 and a 10. And so I've got all those different depths to see if they cure at the same rate. Once all my pieces were cut out, I stuck them down onto some Shiny Shield glossy release film. I haven't shown that in here, I seem to have lost the footage, and that's on the inside. And then I sealed it all together into a cuboid shape with a piece of normal sticky tape. So the Shiny Shield adhesive film is on the inside holding it all together, and it just helps it to release from the resin a lot more easily. I stuck some sticky backed plastic down onto my cutting mat because it's got that grid on there, and I thought if I can see through the film onto the grid, I can make sure when I attach the cuboids that they're going to be really nice and square and not wonky. Then I glued all of my cuboids into place with hot melt glue. Okay, it's time to mix the resin. Before that, you're supposed to heat it up. Both parts, it says, so heat them up in warm tap water. It says for 3 minutes, but I did it for about 10, I think, just to make sure they were nice and warm. And then you mix equal parts into a measuring jug because it's mixing by volume for this one. 1 to 1, and so the same half and half, mix it up very slowly and carefully for about 2 minutes and you're ready to go. Okay, let's get testing and pour this resin in. Like I said at the beginning, I had a plan for these pieces which I'd made because I didn't want to waste all of those bits. And the idea was to put different colours in each one. And because I didn't know exactly how much resin I would need for each one, I decided to put the colour in after I'd poured it. So yeah, just to add the pigment powder like that look and mix it in. But that didn't quite go to plan because I couldn't get it to go down to the bottom. So I got a really unusual effect, which I wasn't planning, but actually I quite liked it in the end. So yeah, I couldn't mix it all the way down because they were just too deep. Okay then, so we're finished and it's 2:10. Let's see how long it took to cure enough to get my moulds off. Okay, it's actually 4 hours and 35 minutes later. Now, I did check it after 4 hours and it wasn't quite solid enough for me to get those plexiglass moulds off, because you do have to be quite rough with them to get those off. If I'd have used silicone moulds, I think 4 hours would have been okay. But I wasn't willing to risk putting it under so much stress just for the sake of the experiment. So it was 4 hours and 35 minutes later. And they were all exactly the same, which shows that they do all cure at the same rate. I did actually check throughout the curing process and they did all feel the same. So yeah, that was quite interesting to discover that. And I was thinking that the other thing is that I didn't use all of that 30 minutes working time. I only used 10 minutes. So I'm thinking maybe, like I said at the beginning, that the 4 hours demold time is after that 30-minute working time. And if that's what it is, then I understand it now, you know what I mean? That it was more than 4 hours because of those extra minutes in the working time. So yeah, I would say that it's an accurate thing to say it's a 4-hour demold, but it would definitely help if your room is warm. Mine was quite cold. I've got a feeling if my room was warmer, it would have been quicker than 4 hours. Okay then, so we know that if the depth of the resin is between 2 and 10 centimetres, that indeed the curing time is around 4 hours. But what will happen if you do a very thin coat? Well, that's the next test. Like I said at the beginning, I had a plan for these pieces and it was to fit them together in a kind of herringbone pattern and then put them in my square coaster mould. Well, it's not necessarily a coaster mould, a square silicone mould, and pour in some resin to seal them all together completely. And that's going to be a really, really thin layer, just like a top coat. So that will be the ultimate test. Will a very thin layer cure in 4 hours? I wasn't sure. Anyway, I'm just gluing them together here. I'm using E6000 glue, clamping them together. Once they were all glued together and the glue had cured, I did sand it on my electric sander because it was all a little bit uneven. Once they were all glued together and it had all been sanded down, it was time to add it to the square mould. I added some resin to the bottom, then placed it in and then made sure that the resin could get down all the sides to make it nice and even around the edges. And I left it to see how long it would take to cure. Let's see what happened. The reason I'm not doing this as one of my usual tutorials, it's more of a demonstration, is because it's so labour intensive. I don't really see many of my viewers actually wanting to try this just because of the amount of work that went into it just to make one coaster. I just wanted to be able to make something with all my test pieces, so it's just something that's fun to watch, hopefully. And not a tutorial, so I haven't gone into much detail. Right then, as you can see from my clock on my phone, it wasn't 4 hours for a very thin layer, which I kind of expected. I think the JDiction 4-hour demold resin is a casting resin. It's not a laminating resin. Laminating resins are for coating things and covering things in just a thin layer. And casting resins, as the name suggests, is for when you're casting something. So, it's not as though they're being dishonest there. It's, I'm just putting it to the ultimate test for my own peace of mind. I wanted to know. And it was 6.5-ish hours for the thin layer, which is still pretty quick. And I don't know if you can tell, but it was a bit bumpy, and that's because of some gaps that I had left between all those pieces, so it didn't cover very well. So I did give it another coat off camera. So in conclusion, JDiction 4-hour resin does indeed cure after 4 hours after the half-an-hour working time if you're casting something between 2 and 10 centimetres. If you're coating something, you can use it for coating, but it will take a couple of hours longer. So it was just a short video today, but I hope it was really helpful to you if you were considering purchasing the JDiction 4-hour resin. I would highly recommend it. It's a beautiful finish and it's so much more convenient to not have to wait too long for it to cure. I will leave a link in the video description along with a discount code. The discount code can only be used if you buy the resin through the JDiction website. It is also available on Amazon, so I will leave a link to that as well, and it's available in many countries around the world, which is a bonus. So we've come to the end of the video. I really hope you found it helpful. If you haven't already subscribed and you would like to, please do. It will help me a lot, and I will see you next time. Bye for now. I will